Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of the ILN Talk Show. I am Tasneem Idris, the Islam and Liberty Editorial Associate, and today we're going to be discussing a very important topic, which is post Islamism in Muslim societies. We are very happy to have Dr. Husnul Amin with us. Dr. Husnul Amin is the ILN Pakistan Fellow. He is the Fulbright Research Fellow at the Stockton University at New Jersey, Associate Professor of Politics, and Executive Director of the Iqbal International Institute for Research and Dialogue in the Islamic University of Islamabad. Dr. Husnul Amin, we're very happy to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.
Thank you. So, before exploring the notion of post-Islamism, let's start by trying to define Islamism itself. It's really a very, controversial concept in itself. It has been debated both academically and publicly, and it's commonly known as a term that refers to diverse forms of social and political activism, advocating that public and political life should be guided by Islamic principles. Would this be your definition of Islamism?
So thank you, Tasneem. And of course, this is the obvious question before having a discussion on post-Islamism. Just to briefly discuss what is actually Islamism. And so at the very outset, let me discuss 2-3 points, and then we can just try to define the concept.
Sure.
So in the background, I would say, I think there is a global consensus emerged, at least among the academicians, that what is Islamism actually, So, before this understanding of Islamism is a very closed, kind of militant, kind of Islamic manifestation.
Yeah.
It has been criticized. So the varieties, the diversity in Muslim societies, as well as its Islamist manifestations, has been taken into account by the academic community. So it's a good thing which actually happened, that to appreciate the diversity, the plurality in Islamist organizations, as well as their ideological frameworks, their organizational structures, and their approaches to social and economic change. So given that in the background, Islamism is basically a political ideology that actually believes in reordering of the state as well as society in the light of an understanding of Islam, which actually they think provide some parameters and some guidance to bring about a social and economic change in society. But primarily the focus is actually the state, not society. The state is actually, like, for me, people can disagree with this understanding, but for me, a typical Islamism would be actually that believes in unsettling the existing state and then reordering and recreating it with a kind of Medina state or whatever, an ideal Islamic state. So that is something very essential actually in the belief and the ideology of Islamism. The second thing is actually, as ideology, Islamism tries to, blur the boundaries between an individual obligation and a social obligation and a community obligation. So they think actually this is an obligation on every single individual Muslim to struggle for creating the state.
Okay.
And the third thing I would say is actually with a top-down approach. So mostly they would believe in creating a change from above. And if there would be a bottom-up approach, then that would be actually something else. So my final, I would say, conclusion about this would be that Islamism is diverse. There are variants of Islamism, and we can discuss that later or in your next discussion. And It's not always militant, it's not always democratic, it is not always institutional. So there's a variety, there's a whole range of variety actually across countries, across cultures, across societies.
So the definition of Islamism would be it has several definitions. So that's the
Yes.
conclusion. Okay.
Multiple
Yeah.
Islamisms, I would
Yeah.
say. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Sure. So let's jump onto the the topic and try to define post-Islamism. Well, the term itself has been originally coined by Iranian political sociologist Asif Bayat, as you know, in a 1996 essay published in the journal Middle East Critique. He explained it as, I quote, a condition where following a phase of experimentation, the appeal, energy, symbols, and sources of legitimacy of Islamism get exhausted, even among its once ardent supporters. As such, post-Islamism is not anti-Islamic, but rather reflects a tendency to re-secularize religion. What do you think of Bayat's definition?
Tasneem, I would say I agree with this definition.
Okay.
And I have used the same definition in my work and have relied upon that, and have actually made some addition to that definition and understanding as well, which I will discuss shortly.
Okay.
So post Islamism would be like, the post thing,
Why do we
post
need to
more.
add that post?
Yeah. So something has really gone wrong with Islamism. So a post-Islamist movement or intellectual or activist would actually consider that there is something wrong with the previous notion of like the Islamism, and that's why we need actually a post. So we need to do something which is either consciously, deliberately omitted, deleted from the idea of this bringing about change, or something has been added which is actually not in the essential part
Yeah.
of Islam, or the
There is
political
an
Islam.
improvement.
Yeah, so there's an improvement. Yeah.
In what
So,
area?
I think there are a few areas. One is, there is a conceptual shift actually. So I think initially it was actually an intellectual challenge for most Muslim intellectuals, scholars, ulama, maybe somewhere in different countries in their own contexts. Because what happened in the 80s and 90s, as you just mentioned, referred to Bayat's discussion, there were several experimentations. You see, in Sudan, we know, in Iran, the Khomeini
Yeah.
revolution, then in Afghanistan, another kind. And then, in Saudi Arabia, this conflation of Salafi and ideology and the king. And
Yeah.
then in Pakistan, the Islamization by Ziaul Haq. So, different kind of experimentations were made to reorder the state and society with different approaches. But there were serious critiques which actually emerged in the 90s as well. So we see in Iran, for example, some of the post-Islamists were actually ardent supporters of the Iranian Khomeini revolution. And then even in Pakistan, most of the post-Islamists, as I categorize them, for example, they were actually once ardent believers in the ideology of political Islam and even militant Islam at times as well. But
Yeah.
what they did, like, they started criticizing the very basic assumptions, the very basic vocabulary, terms and categories of political Islam, which are used in various ways, in different connotations and in different settings. And then they came up with a new interpretation of the religious text as well. So it also actually matters. You are discussing post-Islamism in which setting?
Yeah.
So my work is actually mostly related to Pakistan, but there is actually a shared, there is actually a shared space in
Yeah.
which you can see that post-Islamism is more about rights of individuals, rights of minorities, youth concerns,
Exactly.
women, as Bayat has discussed in detail these
Yeah.
things. And then I think one major shift was actually bringing about change from with a bottom-up approach. So
Yeah.
focusing society civil society, media, and these arenas more than actually the state. So
Hmm.
this is a kind of discussion that comes across in when
Yeah.
we discuss post-Islamism. Yeah.
So speaking of, rights, women's rights, and other youth rights, I was reading through Asif Bayat's essay, and I found this very important quote where he says, "Post-Islamism is neither anti-Islamic, un-Islamic, nor is it secular. Rather, it represents an endeavor to fuse religiosity and rights, faith and freedom, Islam and liberty." And we're interested in this side, in this political freedom and religious freedom and Islam and liberty network. So when I read this, I have a question. I would say, doesn't Islam already encompass all these values? Like, why do we need to have a post? As if we're suggesting that Islam is, in essence, isn't about right, freedom, or liberty. So I would assume that in Islamism they did not really translate the values of Islam in reality. So they needed to come up with another concept to to just correct it.
So since we are actually focusing more on Bayat's understanding, so I would like to quote another paper by Bayat, which is actually he is saying asking the right question
Hmm.
about democracy and Islam. You might have studied it.
Yeah.
So he's saying actually this is a wrong question asking that whether Islam and democracy are compatible or not. The right question would be who is creating that compatibility between Islam and democracy.
Yeah.
The reason is what? The reason is actually is our classical traditional definition of Islam would be that would be like whatever is there in Quran and Sunnah or in Hadith, for example. So the textual sources do not speak for themselves. There should be somebody, a scholar, an alim, a
Yeah.
religious cleric, or a state or an institution, which actually need to define what does the text mean
Hmm.
related to certain situation, for example, gender or minority or youth, for example. So
Yeah.
creating these bridges between the text and the context, that is actually more important than the very static of idea. So okay, I we agree these values are actually enshrined in Islam, but the thing is that how to relate those values to society, to a modern order, how to bring about, because a militant who is there fighting, as a private group of jihadi group, he is
Yeah.
also quoting the same verses from the Quran,
True.
which are actually quoted by, for example, by a post-Islamist scholar who is a critic of that. So
But the context is different. Yeah.
the context. So what is there is interpretative struggle. There's a struggle and contestation in interpretation. People have come up with new hermeneutics, new interpretation techniques, so that to come up with a meaning which is actually more inclusive, which is less exclusive, which can take into account diverse shades and cultural shades of society.
Hmm. But if we look back 1,400 years ago in the Constitution or the Charter of Medina, all the rights of minorities, Christians, Jews, and non-believers were taken care of. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was a prophet, but also a political leader. So, and Islam is packed with many religious and political regulations. So, if they were able to do that back then, what really changed nowadays after all these years? Like, there's a misunderstanding of Islam.
So I think that would be the beauty of Islam, that it uh, I think this is mentioned by this very famous Soroush,
Hmm.
Iranian scholar, that you need something fixed which is actually not changing, and then you need something which is actually changing, you know,
Yeah.
because there is a degree of dynamism in society. So what is happening? You have the fixed thing which is the text, and it is always there, so you can always revert back to that text, interpret it, reinterpret it, and then reinterpret it accordingly. but you have changing conditions, actually changing situation. So although the text was there, but you didn't have this modern bureaucratized legal hierarchical state, for example, at that time. You didn't have these modern bureaucracies. You didn't have this modern system of transportation and the postal system and so many things. So the values were there, and you can actually always build new systems on the basis of values. But a complete and detailed charter of a system, for example, an economic system, or political system, or social system, I think that would be against the very essence of Islam. That's what I
Hmm.
understand. Because if everything was given there, then actually you lose the ground for ijtihad and for change
Absolutely.
and for dynamism in society. So you need actually both this fixed thing, fixed text, so that there is something where you can always actually go back
Pillars.
and reinterpret it. Yeah. And then you need actually this dynamism, which was called the principle of movement in
Right.
Iqbal's reconstruction of religious thought. Yeah.
Right. But we're still having those two sides. We're still in the realm of Islam itself. So we wouldn't need to say that post-Islamism is there to secularize religion, because these are the definitions that I'm finding in different articles. They would say that post-Islamism is a way to secularize the state and to make sure that it's not only about religion and giving dawah, which is Islamic evangelism, and all of these things. We have to make sure that religion is out of the way, and post-Islamists are there to, they believe in parties and political parties and the civil state, but it's still part of Islam, so this is the controversy.
So, I think these are heuristic concepts, and it is up to the scholar to define what does he mean by this concept. So,
Hmm.
what actually bayat and what actually students like us actually who follow bayat in this, we all mean by this concept that it is not something secular, it is not something a-religious or anti-religious,
Yeah.
because the reason is actually they believe in reinterpretation of the same text. They are creating, bringing new energy into those concepts, for example. And so, the beautiful thing is, for example, you are from Tunisia, so Tunisian experience of this Muslim democracy or
I
Muslim
was gonna
democrat,
mention that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was listening to, I think it was Somaya Ghanouchi, or yeah, one of his daughters, and
Mm-hmm.
beautifully, like she explained this thing, and I think that was wonderful. She said that actually, we are not secular, we are Muslims, but we are not against secularism. We are not against like democracy. So we bring like creating a fusion between the two, and
Yeah.
that.
So during the pandemic, I think in Pakistan the congregational prayers did not stop, the Friday prayers, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is
And
correct. Yeah.
mhm.
Hmm.
And that was because religious religious people and religious authorities intervened, and they did not want it to stop. And we have other cases in the Muslim world as well. Whether in other countries like in Tunisia, we didn't even have that debate. The mosque closed because it was a medical urgency, and even the religious authorities explained that and justified that from a religious perspective. So is this Islamism and post-Islamism, or how do we
Ah.
differentiate between both cases?
it's a it's a beautiful question actually. I would say it's a post-Islamist society you have, and we are still passing through this. No, I think I will articulate on this in another way. Uh, Pakistan is having its own history in relation to religion, Islam, and Islamic institutions and clergy, for example, and
Yeah.
madrasas as well. So there
Hmm.
is an autonomous sphere, uh, and there's a long history. Of course, we need actually another debate on that and another
Sure.
discussion on that. It's a huge discussion about that. Actually, how first state used Islam and religious beliefs and religious emotions, for example, of people and the society for different political causes. And then now society has taken control of that thing, not society, but the clergy and the madrasas and the religious class actually. So
Mm-hmm.
it has become very difficult to bring legal reforms which pertain to something which relates to religion, for example. So it has become very difficult because the religious forces in the autonomous sphere, in madrasas, mosques, and in the civil society, they have a huge presence, and which is actually controlling the state.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would say, like as happened in Tunisia, it should have been the other way around. For example, if they were issuing fatwa, verdicts, the religious ulama,
Yeah.
they should have taken permission from the state whether we should issue this or not. But it was
Yeah.
happening the other way around actually. The
Mm-hmm.
state was actually, was very apologetic and was requesting them not to do this and not to. So it's a different configuration in Pakistan for historical, sociological, economic, political, and cultural reasons,
Mm-hmm.
which luckily is not the case in Tunisia up till now. Yeah, although
Yeah.
there are some incidents and some.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, but not as a phenomenon,
Yeah.
as is the case in Pakistan.
But
Yeah.
as far as rights, minority rights, women's rights, and youth rights are concerned, what is the best model? What is the best choice between what are the good things in post-Islamism that are not there in Islamism, or does post-Islamism itself need some improvements as well in this regard?
Uh, I would say, like, uh, there are some conceptual shifts, some development, some new literature, some new understandings have come across about, this conceptualizing women in Muslim society.
Yeah.
She didn't have an independent legal personality in Muslim society, and there were so many issues around. Like, okay, again, Tunisia and Pakistan are different. Bangladesh and Pakistan are different. Malaysia and Indonesia is different.
Yeah.
So not considering every society like
But
homogeneous,
generally
something like that.
speaking, yeah.
Yeah, generally speaking. But I think there are some conceptual shifts which actually provide more empowering, liberating space to women and her mobility, her visibility in society, her social and political role. And there are few things which have been accepted by the Islamists as well. For example, women participation in politics. If
Yeah.
you go into very classical understanding of Islamism, of women role, they were not in favor of women's participation in politics. But
Yes.
as opportunities expanded and as they could see, like the challenges, for example, so they became themselves custodians of women's liberation as well in some spheres,
Yeah.
and at least in the political sphere. But I think there is the domain of culture, the domain of social sphere, in which still, again, I am focusing on Pakistan. The women is having several challenges, mostly coming from religious and specifically the conservative religious classes.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a conflation of religion and this patriarchy, this traditional tribal notions of
Yeah.
patriarchy. This conflation has created so many confusions, which is not providing a level playing field for women
Yeah.
in most Muslim societies. But Pakistan is a brilliant example in that.
Yeah, but even if there is like a representation of women in politics, sometimes it's still symbolic. So we can see women in parliament, but they're not really heard enough. They're just, their presence is symbolic. And I think this is still, happening in many Muslim majority countries that claim themselves post-Islamic, because they have women represented in politics, but still they're not really effectively working. So do you think we're still in that level, or we have to go beyond that?
I think we are going beyond that, and we will be going beyond that. You cannot stop actually,
The course of
this is the
history.
human evolution
Yeah.
and course of history, and we can go the other way around as well. As
Sure.
for example, Turkey is showing just another kind of development. As I told, that's a return of Islamism. So
Yeah.
so many things actually keep changing, and it's very
So
difficult to.
even if we reach the summit, even if we reach the summit, and people are having all their rights guaranteed, it's still dangerous because we can always flip to the other side. So what are the guarantees not to do that?
I think that's what human society and civilization is actually.
Yeah.
It's actually just a beautiful couplet by the poet Iqbal, that actually this is life. This
Yeah.
you fly high, and then
Yeah.
you attack your enemy, and then you change your course, and so this
Hmm.
is like this is what actually it is. This is life, and there is a degree of dynamism in life and society, and it will keep evolving, keep changing. There is no stop to that thing. There is no full
Absolutely.
stop to that. Yeah.
That's really a
Yeah.
great note, a beautiful note to end on. I just want to ask if you have any further comments on this vast topic.
I think, as a final note, I would say, a few things, but mainly one issue is, this cross borrowing and learning from each other.
Hmm.
When you close the boundaries, and you say this is as it was the case here, the West versus the rest, or these Oriental kind of categories,
Yeah.
Orientalism and other stuff. So we shouldn't also, in a kind of reverse Orientalism, we shouldn't close the boundaries as well. You know, if there is actually an evolution in human thinking and understanding of issues, for example, we as Muslims should keep ourselves, our minds, our brains open to new things. And I
Hmm.
think that would be the beauty of a Muslim society, which keeps itself open to new things, which keeps evolving, which keeps assessing and reassessing its course. it
Hmm.
it is correcting its wrongdoings in the past, and it is just very futuristic, looking at the future, that how things will unfold, and how to prepare oneself and one's society to cope with those challenges.
Hmm. And this is at the heart of Islam, because some people would label this as a progressivist kind of thinking, which it is so, but it's still at the heart of Islam because as Muslims, we're encouraged to do that. I'm just annoyed because a lot of people think that this is not part of Islam because we as Muslims have misrepresented it, maybe, but it's still at the heart of Islam to, to look to the future and be open minded as we can, right?
Yeah, I think yeah, you rightly put it. And again, there's a theoretical Islam, and
Absolutely.
then
Yeah.
then we Muslims, which is actually the practical demonstration of that. So
Hmm.
Islam is known by our actions, actually, is known to the world by our own actions. You cannot compare, for example, people do comparing, Islamic values with the real practice of the West. They say,
Yeah.
this thing was in Islam and this thing was in Islam. Okay, but but where it is in the Muslims?
True.
Where is it available? In which society, for example? Democratic values, freedoms, justice, social justice, economic justice, and different things. So I think this practice, this practical, uh, demonstration of whatever values we have, that would be something which we can demonstrate as that, okay, this is Islam and these are Muslims. So I don't think that is the case actually. Yeah, we are
Yeah.
comparing values with practice. We have
Yes.
good values, okay, theory, but what other societies are doing, for example, in the West. So these are not comparable concepts
True.
actually. Yeah, yeah.
True. True. So yeah. So I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much, Dr. Hassan. I mean, I'm looking forward to having you as a guest again in our island talk shows, and I'm sure our viewers enjoyed your insights and would love to have you again with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.